The Cadillac's engine hummed through the Harlem streets like a death song. In the back seat, Bumpy Johnson sat motionless, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror where he could see his driver's hands trembling on the steering wheel. The man thought he was clever. Thought Bumpy hadn't noticed the route they were taking. 3 blocks off the usual path, heading straight toward 145th Street, where the Genovese family had been setting up shop. "You nervous about something, Tommy?" Bumpy's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "No, sir, Mr. Johnson, just traffic's heavy tonight." But there was no traffic. The streets were empty, cleared out like someone had called ahead. Someone had. To understand what happened that night in 1968, you need to go back 3 weeks earlier, when Bumpy Johnson was at the height of his power. The man they called the King of Harlem wasn't your typical street thug. While other bosses relied on muscle and fear, Bumpy had built his empire on something far more dangerous: intelligence. He could read people like newspapers, every gesture, every pause, every lie written across their faces like headlines. It's what kept him alive when Lucky Luciano wanted him dead. It's what made him untouchable when the cops tried to frame him. And it's what told him 3 weeks ago that someone very close to him was about to sell him out. It started with small things: phone calls that ended too quickly when he entered the room, meetings that got rescheduled at the last minute, money that didn't add up in the books. But the biggest tell was Tommy Martinez, his driver for the past 2 years. The kid who used to look him in the eye had started staring at the floor. Bumpy had survived 40 years in the game because he understood one fundamental truth. In this business, loyalty wasn't just valuable, it was currency. And someone had just made Tommy Martinez a very rich offer. The Genovese crime family had been trying to muscle into Harlem for months. They'd tried bribes, threats, even burned down 2 of his numbers joints. Nothing worked. Bumpy's operation was too tight, his people too loyal, his reputation too fearsome, so they'd decided to go with the oldest trick in the book: turn one of his own against him. They'd chosen well. Tommy knew Bumpy's routes, his schedules, his safe houses. More importantly, Tommy was the one person Bumpy trusted enough to drive him alone through enemy territory. It was the perfect inside job. Except for one problem. Bumpy Johnson didn't get to be the King of Harlem by being naive. He'd built his empire by being 10 steps ahead of everyone else. And tonight was no different. As the Cadillac turned onto 145th Street, heading straight toward what should have been certain death, Bumpy adjusted his cufflinks and smiled. The game was about to begin, but Tommy Martinez and the Genovese family had no idea who was really playing whom. "Tommy," Bumpy said, his voice steady as stone, "I hope you got paid well for this, because what's about to happen next?" He paused, watching his driver's reflection in the mirror. "Well, let's just say some lessons cost more than money." The street ahead was empty except for 3 black cars parked in a perfect ambush formation. Tommy's hands were shaking now, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool October air. He thought he was delivering Bumpy Johnson to his execution. He had no idea he was driving straight into his own. The 3 black cars sat like vultures on 145th Street, their engines running, exhaust smoke mixing with the October fog. Inside the lead vehicle, Vincent "Vinny" Torino cracked his knuckles and checked his watch. The Genovese family's enforcer had been planning this hit for weeks and everything was falling into place perfectly. "Tommy better deliver," Vinny muttered to his lieutenant Sal Benedetto. "We paid that kid enough money to buy his own fleet." What Vinny didn't know was that 30 minutes earlier, Bumpy Johnson had made a phone call from his office above the Cotton Club. Not to cancel his evening drive, not to call for backup, but to Detective Ray Morrison, one of the few honest cops left in Harlem, a man who owed Bumpy his life from an incident 3 years prior. "Ray, you know that surveillance equipment you've been wanting to test? The wire recording devices from the FBI?" Bumpy's voice had been calm, almost conversational. "Well, tonight might be your lucky night." Tommy Martinez thought he was smart. He thought $20,000 from the Genovese family was enough to betray the man who'd given him a job when nobody else would, the man who'd paid for his sister's operation, the man who'd treated him like family. But Tommy had made the classic mistake that destroyed every would-be betrayer in the game. He'd underestimated exactly how deep Bumpy Johnson's reach went. The Cadillac rolled to a stop exactly where Vinny expected it to. Tommy's hands were shaking so badly now he could barely grip the wheel. In the back seat, Bumpy sat perfectly still, his breathing steady, his eyes sharp as broken glass. "Step out of the car, Johnson." Vinny's voice echoed through the empty street as he emerged from the lead vehicle, a Thompson submachine gun cradled in his arms. "Nice and slow. Your boy Tommy here told us you'd be coming." Tommy couldn't bring himself to look in the rearview mirror. He'd sold out the most dangerous man in Harlem, and now he had to watch him die. The guilt was eating him alive, but $20,000 would set his family up for life. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. "You know, Vinny," Bumpy said, finally stepping out of the Cadillac with his hands raised. "My grandfather used to tell me something when I was a boy growing up in Charleston." His voice carried that same calm authority that had made him legendary. He said the difference between a smart man and a wise man is simple. A smart man learns from his mistakes. A wise man learns from other people's mistakes. Save the philosophy lesson for hell, Johnson. Vinny leveled the Thompson at Bumpy's chest. "You've been running Harlem like you own it for too long. The Genovese family is taking over now." But something was wrong. Bumpy wasn't scared. He wasn't begging. He wasn't even sweating. Instead, he was smiling that same cold smile that had struck fear into the hearts of gangsters from the Bronx to Brooklyn. "See, that's your first mistake, Vinny. You think this is about territory. You think this is about money." Bumpy's voice never wavered, even with a machine gun pointed at his heart. But this was never about Harlem. This was about respect. And respect is something you can't take. It's something you earn. "What the hell are you talking about?" Vinny's finger moved to the trigger, but something in Bumpy's demeanor made him hesitate. "I'm talking about the fact that you're standing in the middle of the street, in full view of those apartment windows, confessing to conspiracy and attempted murder." Bumpy gestured slightly with his head. "I'm talking about the fact that my friend Detective Morrison has been recording every word you've said for the past 5 minutes." Vinny's blood turned to ice. His eyes darted to the windows above, where he could now make out shadows and the glint of camera lenses. But it was too late. He'd already said too much, done too much. The trap had been sprung, and he was the one caught in it. "You see, Tommy," Bumpy turned to address his driver, who was still frozen behind the wheel. "The thing about betrayal is it's like a disease. Once it starts, it spreads. And right now, your new friends are about to learn what happens when that disease infects the wrong people." The sound of police sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer by the second. But they weren't coming to save Bumpy Johnson. They were coming to arrest Vincent Torino and his crew for conspiracy, attempted murder, and a dozen other charges that would put them away for life. Tommy Martinez had thought he was selling out Bumpy Johnson. Instead, he delivered the entire Genovese operation straight into the hands of the law. And the most terrifying part was beginning to dawn on him. Bumpy had known about the betrayal all along. They thought they had set a trap for the king of Harlem. They were wrong. The trap had been set for them, been set for... The police sirens were getting closer, but Vinny Torino wasn't going down without a fight. His finger tightened on the Thompson's trigger as his mind raced through his options. He could shoot Bumpy and run. He could take him hostage, or he could try to talk his way out of this nightmare. "You think you're smart, Johnson?" Vinny's voice cracked with desperation. "You think some crooked cops are gonna save you? We own half the precinct. This recording won't hold up in court." But Bumpy Johnson just stood there, hands still raised, that same infuriating smile playing across his lips. "See, that's your second mistake, Vinny. And you think Detective Morrison is the only one listening?" 20 minutes earlier, while Tommy Martinez was sweating bullets in the driver's seat, Bumpy had made another call. This one to Federal Agent Catherine Walsh, the FBI's lead investigator on organized crime in New York. Agent Walsh had been trying to build a case against the Genovese family for 2 years, but their operation was too careful, too insulated. She needed them to slip up. She needed them to confess. Bumpy Johnson was about to give her exactly what she needed. "You want to know the difference between street justice and real justice, Vinny?" Bumpy's voice carried across the empty street like a death sentence. "Street justice is quick, it's bloody, it's over in 5 minutes. Real justice? Real justice takes patience, it takes planning, and it lasts forever." From the rooftop of the apartment building across the street, Agent Walsh adjusted her surveillance equipment and smiled. Through her headphones, she was recording every word of Vinny's confession, every threat, every admission of guilt. This wasn't just going to destroy Vinny Torino. This was going to bring down the entire Genovese operation in Harlem. But Bumpy wasn't finished. He'd been planning this moment for 3 weeks, ever since he'd first suspected Tommy's betrayal. And the beauty of his plan wasn't just that it would eliminate his enemies. It was that it would do so without him having to fire a single shot or break a single law. "Tommy," Bumpy called out, never taking his eyes off Vinny. "Step out of the car, son. There's something you need to hear." Tommy Martinez felt like he was walking to his own execution as he climbed out of the Cadillac. His legs were shaking so badly he could barely stand. The $20,000 in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Mr. Johnson, I can explain." "No need to explain, Tommy. I understand perfectly." Bumpy's voice was calm, almost fatherly. "You needed money for your sister's medical bills. The Genovese family offered you more than you'd ever seen. They made it seem easy. Just drive me to a certain location, just look the other way." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. He'd betrayed the one man who'd ever treated him with respect, and now that man was about to die because of his weakness. "But here's what you don't understand, son. This was never about money. This was about respect. And respect is something that can't be bought or sold. It can only be earned." The sirens were almost on top of them now. Red and blue lights began to flash against the brick buildings, casting strange shadows across the confrontation. But instead of running, instead of panicking, Bumpy Johnson reached into his jacket pocket. Vinny tensed, finger on the trigger. "Don't even think about it, Johnson." But Bumpy didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out an envelope. A thick manila envelope that he tossed at Tommy's feet. "Open it, Tommy." With trembling hands, Tommy tore open the envelope. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Pictures of Vinny Torino meeting with corrupt cops. Pictures of money changing hands. Pictures of drug deals and murder plans. And sitting at the center of it all, clear as day, was a photograph of Tommy himself, handing over Bumpy's schedule to a Genovese lieutenant. "You see, Tommy, the thing about betrayal is that it leaves a trail. And I've been following that trail for 3 weeks now. Every meeting you attended, every phone call you made, every dollar they paid you." Tommy's world collapsed around him. Not only had he betrayed Bumpy Johnson, but Bumpy had documented every step of his betrayal. The evidence in his hands was enough to send him to prison for the rest of his life. But here's the thing about justice, son. Sometimes it's about punishment, and sometimes it's about redemption. The police cars screeched to a halt surrounding the scene. But they weren't coming for Bumpy Johnson. They were coming for Vincent Torino and his crew. As the officers moved in with weapons drawn, Bumpy turned to Tommy one last time. "You've got a choice to make, Tommy. You can run with these men and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, or you can stay here and face what you've done like a man." Tommy looked at the photographs in his hands. Then he looked at Vinny Torino, whose face was twisted with rage and desperation. Finally, he looked at Bumpy Johnson, the man he'd tried to destroy, who was offering him a chance at redemption. The choice he made next would determine whether he lived as a coward or died as a man. But Vincent Torino wasn't waiting around to see how this played out. With federal agents closing in and his entire operation about to be exposed, he raised the Thompson submachine gun and pointed it straight at the heart of the man who'd outsmarted them all. "If I'm going down, Johnson, I'm taking you with me." The street erupted in chaos. But in that moment of pure violence and desperation, one thing became crystal clear. Bumpy Johnson had planned for this too. Vincent Torino's finger was squeezing the Thompson's trigger when the impossible happened. Tommy Martinez threw himself between the gun and Bumpy Johnson, his arms spread wide like a shield. "No," Tommy's voice cracked through the night air. "I won't let you kill him because of my mistake." The gunshot echoed through 145th Street like thunder. But instead of Bumpy Johnson falling to the pavement, it was Vincent Torino who staggered backward, clutching his shoulder. The shot hadn't come from his gun. It had come from Detective Ray Morrison's service weapon, fired from the rooftop across the street. "Drop your weapon, NYPD," Morrison's voice boomed through a megaphone as federal agents swarmed the scene from every direction. But the real shock came when Bumpy Johnson reached into his other jacket pocket and pulled out a small recording device. The red light was still blinking. "You want to know something, Vinny? That conversation we just had? About you owning half the precinct? About the Genovese family taking over Harlem?" Bumpy held up the recorder so everyone could see. "Well, Agent Walsh and her FBI team have been listening to every single word." Vinny's face went white as a corpse. Not only had he confessed to conspiracy and attempted murder, he'd just admitted to bribing police officers and revealed the entire structure of his family's operation. In less than 10 minutes, he'd handed the federal government everything they needed to destroy the Genovese presence in Harlem forever. "That's impossible," Vinny gasped, blood seeping through his fingers. "We checked for wires. We swept the area. There's no way you could have." "See, that's your third mistake, Vinny. You checked the wrong person for wires." Bumpy smiled that cold smile one more time. "Tommy, show him what's in your jacket pocket." With shaking hands, Tommy reached into his coat and pulled out an identical recording device. The same red blinking light, the same federal-grade equipment. "I've been wearing this wire for 3 weeks," Tommy whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Ever since Mr. Johnson found out about the $20,000. Ever since he gave me a choice between going to prison or helping him bring down the people who tried to corrupt me." The truth hit Vincent Torino like a sledgehammer. Tommy Martinez hadn't betrayed Bumpy Johnson. He'd been working for him all along. The entire setup, the money, the supposed betrayal, all of it had been an elaborate trap to get the Genovese family to expose themselves. "You see, Vinny, the thing about loyalty is that it can't be bought. It can only be earned." Bumpy stepped closer as federal agents cuffed the bleeding enforcer. "Tommy came to me the day after you made your offer. He told me everything. And that's when I realized you just handed me the perfect opportunity to end this war once and for all." Agent Catherine Walsh emerged from the shadows, her FBI badge gleaming under the streetlights. "Vincent Torino, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, bribery of public officials, and about 15 other federal charges. Thanks to these recordings, we've got enough evidence to take down your entire operation from top to bottom." As they dragged Vinny away, he screamed over his shoulder, "This isn't over, Johnson. The family will never forget this." But Bumpy just straightened his tie and walked back toward his Cadillac. "The family better learn to forget real quick, Vinny, because after tonight there won't be enough of you left to remember anything." Tommy was still standing in the middle of the street, the recording device trembling in his hands. "Mr. Johnson, I don't know how to thank you. You could have let them arrest me. You could have let them kill me for what I almost did." "Tommy, you think I saved your life tonight?" Bumpy paused at the car door. "Son, you saved your own life the moment you decided to come clean. The moment you chose loyalty over money. The moment you threw yourself in front of that gun." The federal agents were loading Vincent Torino and his crew into unmarked vans. Within hours, simultaneous raids would hit every Genovese operation from the Bronx to Brooklyn. By morning, the family that had terrorized New York for decades would be nothing but a memory. "But how did you know?" Tommy asked. "How did you know I would make the right choice?" Bumpy Johnson smiled one last time as he climbed into the back seat of his Cadillac. "Because that's what separates the kings from the pawns, Tommy. Kings don't just play the game. They see the whole board. And tonight the whole board was mine." As they drove away from 145th Street, leaving behind the wreckage of the Genovese family's ambitions, Tommy looked in the rearview mirror and saw something he'd never seen before. Respect. Real respect. The kind that couldn't be bought, couldn't be stolen, and couldn't be faked. He'd almost lost everything for $20,000. Instead, he'd gained something worth infinitely more. He'd earned his place in the legend of Bumpy Johnson. If you think Vincent Torino got exactly what he deserved, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Because this story is just getting started. 6 months later, Vincent Torino sat in a federal penitentiary cell, staring at the concrete walls that would be his home for the next 25 years. The Genovese family had disowned him completely. His wife had filed for divorce. His children refused to visit. The man who thought he could take down the king of Harlem had lost everything that ever mattered to him. Meanwhile, the newspapers were calling it the greatest organized crime takedown in New York history. Agent Catherine Walsh had used the recordings from that night to dismantle not just the Genovese operation in Harlem, but their entire East Coast network. 43 arrests, 17 convictions, millions of dollars in seized assets. And at the center of it all was a man who had never fired a shot or broken a single law. Tommy Martinez had become something of a legend himself. Word spread through the streets about the driver who chose loyalty over money, who threw himself in front of a gun to save the man he'd almost betrayed. Bumpy made sure Tommy's sister got the best medical care money could buy. He promoted him to head of security for all his legitimate businesses. But most importantly, he gave him something that couldn't be purchased: respect. "You know what the funny thing is?" Tommy said one evening as they drove through the same streets where the ambush had taken place. "I thought $20,000 would change my life. Turns out it was choosing not to take it that changed everything." Bumpy nodded from the back seat, watching the lights of Harlem flash by. "Money comes and goes, Tommy. But reputation? That's forever. And after what you did that night, your reputation is bulletproof." The story of that October night became the stuff of legend in Harlem. How Bumpy Johnson turned his enemies' trap into their own destruction. How he used the system against itself. How he proved that intelligence would always triumph over brute force. Old-timers would tell the story in barbershops and corner stores for decades to come. But perhaps the most important lesson came from what happened to the corrupt cops who had been working with the Genovese family. The recordings didn't just capture Vinny's confession, they captured every name he mentioned, every bribe he referenced, every dirty deal he bragged about. By the end of the federal investigation, half the precinct had been arrested or forced to resign in disgrace. Detective Ray Morrison, the honest cop who had helped orchestrate the takedown, was promoted to captain. "You know what Bumpy Johnson taught me that night?" he said years later in an interview. "Sometimes the best way to catch criminals isn't to chase them, it's to let them think they're chasing you." The lessons spread far beyond Harlem. In boardrooms and back alleys, in police stations and federal buildings, people began to understand something fundamental about power. Real power wasn't about who had the biggest gun or the most money. Real power was about who could think 3 moves ahead, who could turn their enemies' strengths into weaknesses, who could win without fighting. Bumpy Johnson ruled Harlem for another decade after that night. He died peacefully in 1968, surrounded by people who respected him not because they feared him, but because he had earned their loyalty through wisdom, not violence. His funeral drew thousands, gangsters and politicians, cops and criminals, all united in their respect for a man who had played the game better than anyone else. Tommy Martinez spoke at the service. "People ask me what it was like working for Bumpy Johnson," he said, his voice steady and strong. "They want to know if he was dangerous, if he was ruthless, if he was everything the stories say he was." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "What I can tell you is this. He was the only man I ever met who could destroy his enemies by showing them mercy, who could win a war by refusing to fight it, who could become untouchable not through fear, but through respect." The legacy of that October night lived on. In a world where loyalty was a commodity and betrayal was just another business transaction, Bumpy Johnson had proven that some things could never be bought or sold. Some things could only be earned. And in the end, that's what separated the kings from the pawns. Kings understood that true power wasn't about controlling people through fear. It was about inspiring them through example. It was about being worthy of the loyalty you demanded. Vincent Torino learned that lesson too late in a prison cell, with nothing but regret for company. The man who thought he could buy respect discovered that some prices are too high to pay. The game continues. The players change, but the rules remain the same. Respect